Everyone said the Bengal was simply too loud to keep. He had been returned 4 times in 3 years, a 13-pound cat with rosettes like a wild thing and a voice that could fill an entire house, a relentless, demanding, opinionated yowl that started at dawn and never quit. Too loud, too intense, too wild for any normal home. That is exactly what all 4 families said right before they handed him back. Then a 72-year-old widow who had not spoken to another living soul in days took the cat nobody wanted home out of nothing but loneliness. And 11 months later, that same impossible voice turned out to be the only reason she is still alive today. Eleanor Hayes lived alone in a pale yellow house on a quiet street in Sarasota, Florida, 3 blocks from the bay. She was 72 years old. For 49 years, she had shared that house with her husband Frank, a retired math teacher who hummed while he made the coffee and never once let her carry the groceries in by herself. Frank had passed 14 months earlier on a Tuesday in April, and the silence he left behind had a weight to it that Eleanor felt sitting on her chest every single morning. Her 2 children lived far away, one in Seattle and one in Denver, and they called on Sundays. The house that had once been so full had gone completely quiet. Eleanor stopped cooking real meals. She stopped turning on the lights in the rooms she no longer used. Some days the only voice she heard was her own, and only when the phone rang. The cat came out of Suncoast Animal Rescue with a reputation that arrived before he did. Bengals are not ordinary house cats. They carry the blood of the Asian leopard cat only a few generations back, and they come with a wild streak and a voice to match it. This one was the loudest in the entire building. Surrendered at 11 months by a family who said they simply could not sleep. Adopted at 15 months, returned at 17 because the neighbors had complained. Adopted a 3rd time, then returned just 26 days later, the form reading only too vocal. A 4th family brought him back after 9 days. He had spent 213 days in the same corner cage, a 13-pound Bengal who paced and called, and the volunteers had quietly run out of hope that anyone would ever choose a cat who never once stopped talking. It was Eleanor's daughter who finally pushed her into it. "Mom, you need something alive in that house," she said on the phone one Sunday. "Even a goldfish, please." Eleanor drove to the rescue only to make her daughter stop worrying, with no intention of adopting anything at all. But the moment she stepped into the cat room, one voice rose loud above all the others, insistent and almost angry, and she followed it to a corner cage where a spotted cat stood up, locked his green eyes onto hers, and yowled at her as if he had been waiting his entire life to give her a piece of his mind. Eleanor, who had not laughed once in over a year, laughed out loud right there in the shelter. "Well," she said, "at least you're honest." She signed the papers an hour later. "I know you're still here and you still haven't subscribed, and I'll be honest with you, that one stings a little. Take 1 second and tap that subscribe button. You are not going to believe what this cat does next." She named him Mowgli, and from the very first night, the silence in that house was finally over. Mowgli announced his sunrise. He announced his breakfast. He announced when Eleanor sat down, when she stood up, and when, in his expert opinion, she had been quiet for entirely too long. For the first time in 14 months, Eleanor had a reason to talk out loud in her own home, and she talked to him constantly, narrating her whole day to a 13-pound cat who answered every single sentence right back. She started cooking again because Mowgli loudly demanded a share of everything that came out of the kitchen. She started keeping a real schedule because Mowgli flatly refused to let her drift through another gray day in her robe. He woke her at the same hour every morning whether she liked it or not. He appointed himself the loud supervisor of the entire household. He yelled at the mailman. He yelled at the vacuum cleaner. He sat in the kitchen window every afternoon and yelled at the squirrels in Frank's old oak tree, and Eleanor would call right back to him from the next room just to keep the conversation going. The cat that 4 families had returned for being too loud had filled a house that grief had hollowed all the way out, and slowly, without quite noticing it happen, Eleanor came back to life. He refused to let her sink. That was simply not on his schedule. In the evenings, Mowgli had one ritual that undid her completely. He would climb onto the back of the couch, drag the soft cream blanket Frank used to use down over himself with his teeth, and burrow underneath it until only his striped face and one stretched-out paw stuck out. And there he would lie against Eleanor's shoulder while she watched her programs, grumbling like a small engine until they both fell asleep. The neighbors, who had braced themselves for years of complaints about the noisy new cat, started noticing something else entirely. Eleanor's lights were on again at night. Eleanor was out tending her garden again in the mornings. Eleanor smiled and waved when she walked out for the mail. Walter, the retired postal worker directly across the street, who walked his old beagle every single morning at 7 on the dot, told his wife that Mrs. Hayes seemed like a completely different woman since that cat had shown up. He was far righter than he knew. Her daughter flew in from Denver that Christmas and could not believe the change. She had left a mother who whispered through gray afternoons and barely touched her food. She came back to a woman who argued out loud with a cat about whether he had already been fed, who kept the radio on, who laughed. On her last night, she stood in the doorway watching Mowgli burrowed under Frank's blanket against her mother's shoulder, and she had to step into the kitchen so Eleanor would not see her cry. The loud, wild, impossible cat nobody had wanted had given her back her mother. Then came a cold morning in February. It was just after 6:40 a.m. Eleanor got up to start the coffee the way she did every single day, and somewhere in the short hallway between the bedroom and the kitchen, her legs simply stopped working. She collapsed hard onto the tile, and when she tried to push herself up, she could not. Her right side would not answer her at all. Her phone sat on the counter, 6 feet and an entire world away. She was alone on the kitchen floor in a silent house, and not one person on earth had any idea. The tile was cold against her cheek. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. And outside the window, the gray street was empty. But Mowgli knew. The cat heard her go down, and he did the one and only thing he had always done best. He got loud. He tore through the house to the big front window, the one that faced Walter's place across the street, planted all 13 pounds of himself on the sill, and screamed. Not a me, a full, raw, relentless wail, over and over and over, his claws waking down the glass, his whole striped body throwing itself against the window again and again and again. He did it for 40 straight minutes, and he did not stop. Across the street, Walter came out at 7 with his old beagle, and the dog froze on the porch steps, ears up, staring hard at the Hayes house, where a spotted cat was hurling himself against the front window and howling like the place was burning down. Walter looked, and then he saw it. Eleanor's morning newspaper still sitting untouched on the porch. He knew that woman had been up before 6 o'clock every day for 30 years. He crossed the street, knocked, called her name, and got nothing back, and dialed 911 with the cat still screaming through the glass beside him. The paramedics were there in 11 minutes. They found Eleanor on the kitchen floor, conscious but unable to move her right side, and they had her at Sarasota Memorial Hospital with time still on the clock. She had suffered a stroke, and the doctor who treated her said the words Eleanor would go on repeating for the rest of her life. Getting her in when they did was the entire difference between a full recovery and something far, far worse. The whole town heard about it inside a week, and the part that left everyone speechless was not that a widow had survived a stroke at 72. It was that a cat nobody had wanted, a cat returned 4 separate times for being too loud, had done the unthinkable and sounded the alarm that saved her. The same cat 4 families had handed straight back, the same cat everyone had sworn was too loud, too intense, too wild to ever live with. That voice the neighbors had complained about, the voice that got him returned again and again and again, the voice that drove 4 whole households to give up on him for good, was the exact same voice that carried across a quiet street on a freezing February morning and saved a woman's life. It was never too much. In the end, it was precisely, perfectly enough. When Eleanor's daughter shared the story online, no names, just the bare outline of what the cat had done, Suncoast Animal Rescue could not keep up with the phones. They logged 36 applications in a single week, and 11 of them asked specifically for the loud ones, the vocal ones, the difficult returns that everyone else kept walking right past. Cats that had sat in their cages for months suddenly had people driving in from 2 states away. Today, Eleanor is 73 and back on her own 2 feet, with a slight limp and a cane she has covered in stickers her grandchildren keep mailing her. Mowgli is 4, he still announces the sunrise, he still demands a share of every single meal, he still drags Frank's old cream blanket over himself on the back of the couch every evening, and rumbles against her shoulder until she drifts off. Walter still walks his old beagle past the house every morning at 7, and now he stops at Eleanor's gate for coffee, and Mowgli yells through the glass the entire time, which Walter has decided is simply the cat's way of saying thank you. Eleanor tells anyone who will sit still long enough that she did not rescue that cat at all, and she is absolutely certain it was the other way around, because some of the loudest, wildest, most returned creatures in this whole world are not too much for a home. They are just waiting behind every complaint and every label and every family that ever gave up on them, for one lonely person who finally needs exactly the noise they were born to make. So, tell me, did Mowgli save Eleanor out of pure animal instinct, or did a cat the whole world kept handing back simply refuse to lose the one person who finally wanted him? Drop your answer in the comments, and if an animal everyone else gave up on ever turned out to be the best thing that happened to you, tell me about them below, because somebody scrolling through tonight truly needs to read it.